Welcome back to another Roblox Studio tutorial. In today's video, we're going to take a look at how we can use data store to save a player's position in the game, just like you might see in an obby. Alright, so let's go and take a look at this. So what I'm going to do first is make it to the first checkpoint. We'll leave the game, and then we'll come back in. Okay, so we made it to the first checkpoint, and I have a script on this part here that saves the player's location. So let's go ahead and leave the game, and then we'll rejoin. Okay, so now we're going to rejoin the game, and we should be at that first checkpoint. Alright, and there we go, we spawned into the first checkpoint. So let's go ahead and do this one more time. We'll make it to the second checkpoint, and we'll check it again. Okay, so I made it to the second checkpoint, and just like the first one, I have a script on here that's going to save the player's location. So let's go ahead and leave the game, and we'll rejoin. And now we'll go ahead and rejoin the game. Okay, and now that we're back in the game, you can see that we spawned on the second checkpoint. Alright, so let's go ahead and dive in and see how we can do this in Roblox Studio. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. We're going to be writing all the scripts in Studio, but to actually test it out, we're going to be doing that on the Roblox website. The first thing we're going to do is write a script in the server script service that's going to save the player's position. And then we're going to take a look at a script that we're going to write for these checkpoints that when a player touches it, it'll save their position. Alright, so let's go ahead and start with that script that's going to be in the server script service. For this script, we're going to be using Roblox data store, so we're going to start with a couple variables for that. The first one is going to be local data store service. And that's going to be equal to game, get service. Inside the parentheses, we're going to put data store service. Next, we're going to make another variable, so we'll say local. This one's going to be player data. And this is going to be equal to data store service. And then we're going to say get data store. And then inside the parentheses, we're going to put player data. After that, we're going to create another variable that we haven't used before, but I'll explain it once we get to it in the script. So this one is going to be local run service. And this is going to be equal to game, get service. Inside the parentheses, we're going to put run service. Okay, after that, we're going to define a function that's going to run when the player joins the game. So we'll say local function. The name of this function is going to be onPlayerJoin, like I normally do. Inside the parentheses, we're going to put player, so that's the player that joins the game. Inside this function, we're going to start with a leader stats that we're actually not going to use in this game, but I'm just going to put it in there because likely you're going to have one in your game. Okay, so we'll say local leader stats. And this is going to be equal to instance.new. We're going to be creating a new folder. Okay, we're going to say leader stats.name. This is going to be equal to leader stats in quotation marks. And then we're going to store this folder with the player by saying leader stats.parent. And that's going to be equal to player. Okay, next we're going to be creating a vector3 value that we're going to use to store the player's position. So we'll say local location. And this is going to be equal to instance.new. This time it's going to be a vector3 value. We need a vector3 value because we need to store the player's x, y, and z position. Okay, we're going to say location.name. And this is going to be equal to location. Then we're going to say location.parent, and we're also going to store this with the player. To use the data store, we need to use the player's user ID, so we're going to create a variable for that. We'll say local, and then the name of the variable is going to be player location ID, and this is going to be equal to location in quotation marks. We're going to do underscore. And then we're going to join this with the player's user ID, which we can do by saying ... and then player user ID. The next thing we're going to do is check in the data store to see if there's any data for the player, and then we can store that data inside of a variable. The name of our variable is going to be location data, so we'll say local and then location data. And this is going to be equal to player data. And then what we're going to do from here is say colon and then get async. So get async is how we're going to check the data store for data. And then in the data store, what it's going to be looking for is going to be this variable right here. So this is where we attach the player's user ID. After we search in the data store, we're going to define two different conditions. One of them is going to be if we find data, and the other one is if we don't find data. Okay, so we'll say if location data. So this will mean that we found data for the player. Then what we're going to do is say location dot value. So this is the value that we created right here. And then we're going to set that equal to something that's going to look a little bit weird at first, but once we get through the whole script, it'll make more sense. Okay, so this is going to be equal to vector3 dot new. And then inside the parentheses, we're going to put location data. And then we're going to add square brackets and the number 1. And then we're going to do a comma. And we're going to do the same thing, but this time inside of the square brackets, we're going to do the number 2. And then one final time, but this time we're going to change it to 3. Okay, so eventually what we're going to end up doing is we're going to save the vector3 value that stores the player's position as a table. And then once we have it as a table, once they load into the game, we're going to convert it back to a vector3, which is what we're doing at this part right here. And if that doesn't make much sense right now, don't worry about it. Once we have the whole script done, then I'll go back through and explain everything. Basically what we have now is the player's position when they left the game from the last session. So what we need to do now is take that position and actually spawn them in that location. The first thing we want to do though is make sure the character has been added into the game. And we can do that by saying player dot character added. And then we're going to say colon connect. Inside here, we're going to be connecting this to a function. Inside the parentheses, we're going to put CHR, which is going to be short for character. So once the character loads into the game, then we're going to check for the humanoid root part. So we'll say local. And then I'm going to shorten it to HRP for humanoid root part. And that's going to be equal to the character, colon, wait for child. So we're waiting for this to load in. And then what we're waiting for is going to go inside the parentheses, which will be the humanoid root part. Okay, next is where we're going to use the run service. So we're going to say run service dot stepped colon and wait. So what this does, it just helps to make sure that everything prior to this has finished before we go on to the last step. And the last step is going to be setting the player's position by using the location value. So for that, we're going to say the humanoid root part dot cframe. And this is going to be equal to cframe dot new. And then inside the parentheses, we're going to put location dot value. Okay, so that covers the case if the player has data, which would mean they played the game before. We also need to cover the case if this is their first time playing. So what we're going to do is we're going to say else. And in this case, we're just going to spawn them in some sort of start location. So what I'm going to do for this is up top here, I'm going to say local start location. And I'm just going to set this equal to the vector3 dot new. And then inside the parentheses, I'm just going to say 0, 0, 0. Okay, and then down here in this else statement, I would just say location dot value. And this is going to be equal to start location. In some cases, you may not even need this else condition. If you want to leave it off, then the player would just spawn in the default spawn location. Okay, so that covers everything when the player joins the game. So now we need to save the player's location when they leave the game. To do that, we're going to use a separate function. So we'll say local function. The name of this function will be onPlayerExit. We're also going to take in the player. Inside this function, we're going to say local success. And then comma ERR, which is going to be short for error. This is going to be equal to pcall. And this is how we're going to do error handling. So if something goes wrong, it's not going to break our script. It just won't save the data. Next to this pcall, we're going to put parentheses. Inside the parentheses, we're going to put function, and then another set of parentheses. Now inside of this pcall function, what we're going to do is say local player location. So this is going to be the same line above, so I'll just copy and paste it. And next, instead of reading data from the data store, we're going to be saving it. So we're going to say player data, and then we're going to say colon set async. Inside the parentheses, we're going to start with this variable right here, which will be the player's user ID. And we also need to tell it what data we're going to be storing, but we can't put the vector3 value here. So what we're going to have to do is convert that vector3 to a table, and then we can store the table. So we're going to create that function in just a second, but we're going to pretend like it exists for now. And we're going to say convert, which will be the name of our function. And then what we're going to pass to this function is going to be player.location.value. Before we write this convert function, we're going to finish up the one we're currently working on. So down below, we're going to say if not success, then we're going to say warn, which is similar to a print statement. And then inside the parentheses, we're going to say could not save data. Okay, so that covers when the player leaves the game. So let's go ahead and write our convert function. So we're going to say local function. The name of this function is going to be convert. And then inside the parentheses, we're going to put VEC, which will be short for vector. So this value for this parameter is going to come from right here. So we're passing a vector3 into this function. And then what we want to do inside this function is take the vector3 and convert it to a table. To do that, all we have to do is say return. And then what we're going to be returning is a table. And for this table, the first part is going to be vec.x. So that'll be the x position of our vector. And then we'll do the same for the y and the z. So we'll say vec.y. And then finally one for the z. So vec.z. And finally down here at the bottom, we're just going to connect these functions to their events. So we'll say game.players.playerAdded, and we're going to connect this one to our first function, which is onPlayerJoin. And then when they leave, we're going to say game.players.playerRemoving. And then we're going to say :connect. And then this time it's going to be onPlayerExit. Okay, and now that we have the whole script, let's just spend a few moments and go over what's happening. So basically what we're doing is when the player touches this part here, the checkpoint, we're going to save their position as a vector3. So that vector3 gets stored in this variable right here. When the player leaves that game, we want to save that vector3, but first we need to convert that into a table. So to convert it into a table, we wrote a separate function, which is what this line right here is doing. So when it gets to this point, it's going to jump to this function. What this function is going to do, it's going to take our vector3 value and put it inside of a table. And basically all it's doing to put it inside that table is just separating it out into the x, y, and z components. And once we have a table to store, it's going to put that inside the data store. Then when the player joins the game, it's going to go up through this section here. And what this section is doing, it's taking a look at the data store, which is what this line right here is doing. And then there's two different possibilities. Either they have data or they don't. If they have data, then what it's going to do, it's going to convert that table back to a vector3. So this is the name of the table. And then at position 1 will be the x part. At position 2 will be the y part. And then position 3 will be the z part. So it's just taking those different parts of the table and putting it back into a vector3. After that, we're going to wait for the character to load into the game and then spawn them in that location. And if this is their first time playing, then we're going to set their location. And if you want to, if they're starting in something like this here, then you can take the start position of the first part, grab the position from it, and then paste it inside this vector at the top here. Okay, so if there's a particular part that you want them to start at, then just grab that part and copy the position part, and you would paste that right here. If you don't want to have this else statement, that's fine. It'll just spawn them in the default spawn location. Okay, so the last thing we need to do is just write a script for this checkpoint here, that when they step on it, it'll save the player's position to the location value. Okay, to do that, go ahead and click on your checkpoint. And it doesn't even have to be a checkpoint. This will work for any type of part. But what you're going to do is just add a script to that part or the checkpoint. And then for the script, we're just going to say local part. And this is going to be equal to script.parent. Next, we're going to say local function. The name of this function will be update location. Inside the parentheses will be other part. Okay, I just need to make sure that I spell function correctly. Inside this function, we're going to get the player. So we're going to say local player. And this is going to be equal to game.players. And then we're going to say colon, and then get player from character. Inside the parentheses, we're going to put other part dot parent. Then we'll say if player. Then what we're going to do is save the player's position. So we'll say player dot location, which is their vector3 value. And then we're going to say dot value. And this is going to be equal to other part dot parent. And then from there, we're going to get the humanoid root part. And then from the humanoid root part, we're going to take the position. Okay, finally, we want to run this function whenever the part is touched. So we'll say part dot touched colon connect. And then inside the parentheses, we're going to put update location. Okay, so that's all there is to the script here. So at any point that you want to save the player's position, you would just add that script to the part. So if you want to, you can add it to all the checkpoints in your game, or just at certain parts in the game. Okay, once you add the scripts to all the parts that you want to, go ahead and save the game to Roblox. And also make sure that it's published. After you have it published, then you want to go to Game Settings. Under Security here, you want to turn on API Services. And then after that, for testing, we're going to use the Roblox website. Okay, and if you want to get to your game page from Studio, then you can click on the 3 dots here, and then press Open Place Page. And then that'll bring you to the Roblox website with your game, and you can test it out. Okay, and we can see that we start on the second checkpoint like we had before. Let's make it a little bit farther, and then we'll check to make sure it's still working. Okay, so we'll make it to this point here. Let's go ahead and leave the game and make sure the save is working. Okay, so I closed out of it, so let's go ahead and rejoin. And when I rejoin, I start at the place where I left off. Okay, so let's check it out one more time. Okay, and we start off at this point now, so it seems like everything's working. This is going to be the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed, and stay tuned for the next one.